As many of you know, we've been doing this for years. We started Technocon back in 2018 as a in-person conference, and then we did, and it was pretty awesome. We had a full day sessions at LinkedIn, and then we did that again in 2019 at Twitter at the time, and it was even more awesome. And that's how I met a lot of you. I see a lot of familiar faces here. And then since pandemic, we've been doing this online. So basically every month we do a roundtable like this, and we have one of the speakers. And again, it's a community by us, for us. So it's all the people that are running some kind of learning and development, usually either in tech companies or for tech people, such as engineers and so forth. So that's what we're about. That's what the Technical Knowledge Conference comes from, the original name. What is different this time is that normally I would do this opening and I would have my own slide deck. And since today we have Jenny, and she's the master of running events and experiences like this, I totally took the back seat to this experience. So no slides from me. It's all Jenny. So I'm just going to take a back seat and enjoy the ride. So Jenny, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Marco, for having me. Great to see you all. And I think meeting most of you for the first time. I am the CEO and founder of the Primary Shift. We are an employee engagement and experience studio. I have a whole body of work around experience design and facilitation that we lead in private team trainings, public trainings, consulting, and facilitation. And I also have a company called the Culture Conference, where we do an organizational conference that's all about leading from the inside out. So that's a little bit about me. I've worked with a lot of Bay Area tech companies, especially. I'm in Oakland, California. So a lot of some of you who are here from companies like Airbnb, Slack, Adobe, Genentech. And so we are all in good company. So great to be with you today. And we're going to hopefully learn a lot that's going to be immediately applicable to the work that you're doing. So I'm going to kick it off in with our slides here. And this is the Experience Design Accelerator. That's what we're working on today. There's 3 basic ways to be here. So as you think about joining this session, one is to be a consumer. So if you're not seeing slides, you want to just click over into the meeting and you should see the slides pop up for you there. 3 ways to be here. One is a consumer, which is like passively letting the information wash over you. The second is to be a critic and to be like, I've tried that, or it doesn't work, or I'm not sure about this. And the third is to be a contributor. And to be a contributor means to come with your glass half full and half empty. So how can you bring all of your experience and all of your wisdom and knowledge to the table, and then also be willing to learn and grow in the time that we're together. So if you are willing during this next hour to be a contributor, will you please give me a physical thumbs up on your screen? Yes, I see some double thumbs up even. Amazing. Thank you. Great. So we are all here to be contributors. And just what's a little high overview of what's coming today. We got 1 power hour together. You're going to experience the design frameworks and actions. So I'm not just going to talk about them, but they're actually part of this session. And I'm going to reverse engineer how I design this session with those frameworks at the very end. We're going to define what experience design is. We're going to review the 3 pillars of designing dynamic experiences. I'm going to introduce you to the dramatic arc event template that I've created over 20 years of designing thousands of events for hundreds of thousands of people around the world. And we'll get a chance to connect with each other, the other amazing people on this line. You're going to receive a PDF of slides afterwards, and I think access to the recording as well. So take notes if it helps you learn. If you can stay as much as possible on video, because again, we are going in breakouts. So that just helps with connection and rapport building. And if you can stay on mute when we're in gallery, I will ask you sometimes to come off and share. And then at that time, feel free to unmute. So want to just start off by getting your impression of what experience design is. What do we mean by that? So how would you define experience design? And I would like you to start that sentence with experience design is ... You're going to finish that in 1 sentence. So your impression of what experience design is, there's no right answer, there's no wrong answer. It's just, let's get all on the same page and define what do we mean by experience design. So if you would just drop that in the chat as you're ready. And again, we'll just kind of see as a group what our impressions are of what experience design is. I see some coming into the chat already. This is great. All right. It's being intentional. I love that. I love the simplicity. You all are nailing this. It's being intentional. It's creating meaningful aha moments. understanding what your learners need, meeting them where they are, helping them take a step towards something new. Yes, design is focused on experiential learning. Awesome. Crafting a plan for the upcoming event, meeting, or experience. Connecting learning with what's most important to the learner. I love that, Andrew. So it's like that learner-centered learning, right? Really coming from their perspective, and we'll talk more about that. Creating those light bulb moments, learning experiences for light bulb moments. Yes, we're absolutely talking about learning experiences. Think about how the participants will feel and experience the content and agenda. Learning-centered experiences to create aha moments. You're pulling it all together. Amazing. These are great. So we're seeing a lot of learner-centered thinking, learning experiences, aha moments, right? They're able to think and do in new ways. So that is, especially in the context that we're talking about, very much what we're going to be exploring here. How do you take this framework and apply it specifically to learning experiences? Could be a meeting, a workshop, a training, a conference, leadership development, executive offsite, anything like that. So we're about to head into our first round of breakouts. You're going to be in groups of 2. You might be, some of you, in groups of 3. I'm going to give you 5 minutes total. Each person is going to share their definition of experience design and how you came to that perspective, right? So what's informed that for you? What have you learned along the way? How has your work led you to that conclusion so far? And after each person is shared, feel free to look for themes, commonalities in your definitions, as well as curiosities about the differences. You might want to ask a follow-up question to your partner. The person who woke up earliest this morning is going to share first, so you get to compare notes there. You have the first minute or so to just drop in, say hi, and introduce yourself. And I will just encourage you to aim for equal voice and accept non-closure. So in a group of 2, you're talking 50% of the time and listening 50% of the time. And knowing at the end of those 5 minutes, you might be like, no, I want more time. And we're just going to do the best with the time that we have, unfortunately, because this is a quick power hour, as I said. So I'm going to create your breakout rooms right now. So just give me a moment here. All right, we've got 2 to 3 people per room. And again, you're going to have 5 minutes together. All right. 5 minutes together and a quick kind of 10-second countdown after that 5 minutes are up. All right. So we will see you back here in 5 minutes. Enjoy your conversation, sharing about your definitions of experience design, how you came to know that, and then look for commonalities and ask any follow-up questions. We'll see you back here in a couple minutes. Awesome. So hopefully you had a conversation, you met a new friend, got to connect and share a little bit about what experience design and how you came to that kind of conclusion so far. And maybe perhaps we will evolve our understanding of what experience design is when we're here together today. So I'm going to share my screen again, and I'm going to share the definition that we've created over the past number of years teaching this work. So our definition at the primary shift is that experience design is the empathetic and strategic process of creating transformational experiences built on meaningful connections and collaborative learning. So you can see there's a number of phrases there. They're in bold, and we'll go over what some of those mean even more about transformation, meaningful connections, and collaborative learning specifically. So when we think about experience design, you've got those 2 words, right? So design, I think of as the map. It's the territory, right, of where we're going. And there's 2 elements here. One is strategic. So your plan is strategic because you're reverse engineering your curriculum starting from your goals and outcomes, right? So you're working backwards. So that's really coming from your mind, but it's also empathetic. It's considering what will the experience feel like from the participant's perspective. And I think a lot of you mentioned that in the chat, right? About the learner and how the learner is going to experience it. So can you really put yourself in the learner's shoes and imagine what it's going to be like for them? And I think as experience designers, that's a great superpower that we have. And that's coming more from a heart, from a feeling perspective. So we want both strategic and empathetic elements as we're doing our design. And then also, then you have the experience, right? What is it like to actually be on this journey together? And I think of the experience as having 3 pillars that are the hallmarks of the kind of experiences that we like to create, and hopefully they will resonate with you. One is to create some kind of transformation, which is creating change or impact, other ways to say that, so that people walk out differently than they walked in, right? If they walk out and they're the same as they always were, then we haven't done our job. I think the second piece is around connection. So how do we really build a culture of belonging where people feel like they can truly be themselves and bring themselves and feel like they're part of a greater whole? And then the third is collaborative learning. How do we harness the wisdom of the room? How do we help participants, team members, colleagues learn with and from each other, not just the person in the front of the room who might be like sage on the stage, right? So let's talk a little bit more about these three pillars of designing dynamic experiences. I'll go a little bit deeper. So again, pillar one, transformation, creating impact or change. And one of the ways that I like to think about this is this comfort, stretch, and panic zone. Can you just raise your hand if this is familiar for you, this model? So many of us are using this model. Okay, great. So in this model, you have comfort zone in the middle, right, where everything is easy, but often can get stagnant and boring. On the very outer ring, you have panic zone. This is where people go into fight, flight, freeze, where they break down or they leave and they never come back, right? And that's different for different people. And then in the middle, you've got the stretch zone, and that's where all the magic and the learning and the growth happens. It's where we're a little bit on our edge, but we're willing to say yes. We're willing to go forward and try something new. So in general, I like to think about when I'm doing sessions, right, meeting people in their comfort zone, establishing that trust and rapport as quickly as I can, and then bringing them into their stretch zone, stretching them as far as I can without going into the panic zone. So thinking also again about like a rubber band, right? How do you stretch that rubber band without snapping it? Because I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads, as I think you know, if you snap that rubber band, it's a lot of work to clean that up and restore trust with your group, right? And so with each group, that's going to be different of like where their comfort zone is, where their panic zone is, and how much you can stretch that stretch zone. And eventually that expanded stretch zone becomes their new comfort zone, and their nervous system will habituate to that. So that's one of the ways that we think about creating transformation with groups. Pillar two, going into connection. This is really creating psychological safety in our groups and a culture of belonging. So I'm sure many of you have heard of Project Aristotle from Google, where they studied what makes the most high-performing teams. And the factor that was really a big surprise to them that was so prominent was not tenure, it was not experience, it was not degrees, it was not how long the group had been working together, it was the degree of psychological safety that they felt with each other, right? So it was the degree to which they felt like they could take risks without fear of judgment or criticism. So connection is a huge component for creating psychological safety. And how do we create those environments of belonging where people feel safe to be themselves, to ask for help? So I'd love to hear from you in the chat. What are your favorite ways to connect participants, teammates, colleagues, and create belonging? How do you do that in your programs and your events? So feel free to drop that in the chat. Again, there's no right or wrong answers here. So anything that comes to mind for you about how you create connection, belonging in groups and teams within your sessions. Yes, we're going to share the slides. Yes. Group challenges or projects. Yeah, so having people work together is a really helpful way. Anybody have any particular like icebreaker questions or icebreaker activities that they love? This is an opportunity for us to also wisdom share with each other, so that, again, I'm not only sharing with you, but you're getting to learn from each other in this space. Improv icebreakers. Yes, improvisation is such a great tool. Group activities throughout, meaningful ways for the group members to learn from each other. What's your favorite food or a great vacation you just took? Yes. Ask questions to the group that invoke a conversation. Have greeters at the door. Chanel, yes, I'm 100% with you. I think about the first thing someone sees when they walk in the door. I think that's huge. You know, making that first impression matters so much. And if you have a friendly, warm face at the door or at the reg table, that makes a huge difference, I think, with people feeling already comfortable in the beginning. A mindfulness activity to help people get present. Yes, their bodies might be there, but they're not, they're mentally and energetically not there, right? So really helping people arrive. A regular social meeting, a minute in tech meetings, give me a recommendation. Yes, we did that quickly kind of in the chat. You can do that. Persistent ways to stay connected after the event, like an ongoing Slack channel, finding things people in common. Marco, be vulnerable and lead by example. Yes, the way that you model vulnerability and connection is going to make a big impact on your group. Start with group rock, paper, scissor. Yes, I love that. Group rock, paper, scissor. If you don't know it, everyone walks around the room doing rock, paper, scissor. If you lose, you become the person's biggest fan and you cheer behind them. And eventually there's two groups facing off. And one person is the ultimate rock, paper, scissors winner. And it's a super fun game. It takes like 5 minutes. And there's a lot of really great metaphors in that game around winning and losing, supporting each other, being more about the we than the me. So I love that one. Great. This is wonderful. Thank you for your contribution so much. Okay, let's go to pillar 3. This is collaborative learning. How do we harness the wisdom in the room, helping participants, teammates, and colleagues to learn with and from each other? So this is, again, shifting our mindset from sage on the stage, the person in the front of the room who knows everything, who's going to talk at an audience who maybe doesn't know as much, to the wisdom is in the room, or sometimes you'll hear it called the guide on the side, right? So how do we think of ourselves when we're the experience designer, or maybe even the facilitator? We are the invisible architect. We are the one who's creating the framework, and then we're allowing people to paint the picture in. So giving them just enough information and to allow them to have a meaningful experience with each other. So instead of facing the facilitator, their convener, we're helping them actually face each other and interact with one another. So another question for you in the chat: what are your favorite ways to help participants, teammates, colleagues learn with and from each other and invite more voices into the room? So how do you help shift away from sage on the stage and towards wisdom is in the room, or guide is on the side? So curious to hear, do you have any favorite tools, resources, exercises, activities, ways that you think about this, even mindsets that help you to make this shift? From Sergio, asking to share some highlight from the weekend, personal life. Yes, Betsy, I ask questions. I try to craft good, open-ended questions to bring people into the conversation meaningfully. Yes, thank you, Betsy. Yeah, I always think about engagement as well, and the easiest and best way to engage your group is just ask a question, right? That's like the simplest way to get people's attention and to get them learning from and within each other. And I always find, you know, when I'm the facilitator, the convener, the leader, I'm also the biggest learner in the room, right? I get to learn to the degree that I'm open and asking questions and actually learning from people. From Stacy, if you could ask this room or group one question to help you X, what would it be? Awesome. So really kind of one of the formats I love that kind of points to what you're saying, Stacy, is like a peer coaching, right? Each person brings a challenge. Maybe it's a leadership challenge. It could be a tactical challenge. You get people in small groups. Each person takes a turn in the hot seat, they share their issue, they ask a question. The other people are going to ask follow-up questions, gather information, brainstorm ideas and resources, right? That's a great way to create that wisdom in the room. From Ashley, polling people who's familiar with the topic, ask them to share their experience. So how can you highlight the people that are in the room, right? Small group activities and bring discussions back. Scavenger hunts, request questions. What did you learn today? Yes, so doing debriefs, super helpful, right? Have people reflect back what they're learning. Speed dating exercise, pair up in 2 minutes with a guided questions, pair and share activities, interactive tools like word clouds and polls. Yes. Brainstorming, kudos, appreciate coworkers. I love that from Marco. Appreciation is a huge tool, right? That really helps people open up. Excellent. These are great. Thank you so much. Feed forward. Great. Let's talk about now, we talked about the 3 pillars. Now we're going to talk a little bit about these 3 event models. They're the flatline model, the chaos model, and the dramatic arc model. These are just ones that I've kind of coined because they're the ones that I see a lot, and perhaps you will recognize them as well. The first 2 are kind of default models, the ones that we fall into. The third is the dramatic arc, which is the one that we're going to be working with and playing with today. So the first one is the flatline model. This might look familiar. It's called the flatline because it's a flat line. We think about change or transformation, not much happens here. This is very typical conference model, right? So you have your opening keynote, speaker panel, speaker lunch, woo! You get your little break in the middle, and then speaker fireside chat, big closing keynote speaker, end, right? Maybe you get a happy hour. And this model, unfortunately, as we've all seen and experienced, leaves people feeling bored, disengaged, and overwhelmed, right? You see people in the back of the room, checking their phones, doing email, anything else but being present. The real connections, learning are happening in the hallway, right? They're happening amongst the participants, not just from the keynote speakers. There's no time for integration, debriefing, connection, right? It's just content. We all know there's plenty of content out there. So how do we shift that paradigm? So flatline model has a place, wouldn't recommend it as a standard model. I don't think it's the most effective use of group time. So let's look at a second model, is the chaos model. It's all over the place. I was recently at a conference in LA. It was a smaller conference, say 100, 150 people. It was in this crazy building that you had to take different elevators to get to different floors. The signage wasn't accurate, so you didn't know where to go. The timing of the sessions was all over the place, so they didn't all stop and start at the same time. Then they have these excursions throughout LA that were also confusing of like, which ones to choose? When are they happening? Where do I go? It dispersed the energy so much from the group. So a chaos model is when you look at it and you're like, what were they thinking? Like, this doesn't make any sense. The information is contradictory. The signage is insufficient. It just doesn't feel cohesive. And sometimes, you know, people fall into chaos model by accident, right? They're not trying to create chaos, but there's some organizing principle that's missing here. And this model leaves people feeling confused and frustrated. I don't know where to go. I don't know what this means. I don't know what to do with the information you're giving me. Now, the third model, this is the one we're going to play with today. This is the dramatic arc model I've developed over the past 20 years of, again, leading thousands of events with hundreds of thousands of people. And this is the proprietary framework that we teach in our programs that's used by thousands of event leaders around the world. And just at a very basic level, you'll see that it looks like an arc. So what I've done is my background is in theater. That's what I did in growing up and in college. And so I have a degree in theater, and I've taken the dramatic arc from theater storytelling and movies and applied it to an event's context. So you'll see here that it looks like a mountain, and that it has a beginning and middle, kind of at the peak there, and an end. And that line is that transformation, right? So we're trying to create some meaningful change by the end, and we call that transformation the primary shift. And the primary shift is a from to statement that meets their audience. We meet our audience where they're at in the from, and then we try to take them to our goal in the to. So it might be from confused to clear, from a toxic gossip culture to authentic, meaningful relationships, right? So you're just looking at what is that shift that you want to create? Where is the group now? Where do you want to take them by the end of your program? On the way, as you're looking up this incline of the mountain, at the top of the mountain, you have your pinnacle. Your pinnacle is the denouement, the climax, the thing we've been waiting for. I see Betsy's like, yeah, I get it, right? In the movie, it's where there's like the birth, the death, you find out who the murderer is, right? It's the thing you've been building up to. And the pinnacle is literally and figuratively the point. It's why we're here. And the pinnacle comes to life in an experience. So the pinnacle is not ideally a keynote speaker where you're kind of passively absorbing information. It's something where you're actively engaged. If it's about courageous leadership, then you're doing something that allows you to feel like I am a courageous leader. So it's experiential, something that you're doing in the moment. On the way up that mountain, you have one of the things that we do is create guidelines, right? These are mindsets, rules of engagement, agreements that help us get aligned as a community and create culture to make our way and that create that psychological safety on the way up to our pinnacle. And after your pinnacle on that down slope, we have integration. This is all about debriefing, reflecting, assessing what just happened. How is that meaningful for me? And how am I going to be different going forward? What are the calls to action there? Yes, very much hero's journey, very much has that, Marco very much has that similar arc to it. So I'm going to go a little bit deeper now into the template, and then I'm going to ask you to do a little bit of reflection about, actually, before I do that, now that I've gone through the three models, I want to create a little space and time to hear from you all. You've just heard those three models. I'd love to invite anyone who's willing to jump off mute and just share like any insights or ahas or like, oh yes, that you experienced as you listened to those three models, like anything that you've seen, anything that's making sense, or even if you have a follow-up question as well. So I'll just pause there and invite any perspective from you all.
I can go if you want, Jenny. So I used to teach technical classes, more specifically Android bootcamp. And I remember like how I was iterating on like, what's the best way to kind of do the transformation. And I discovered like having an arc to a story, right? Like at the end of the day, we're going to build something. And in our case, it was a Twitter app. So there was a clear sort of like, we're going to get to this point that looks very, very far. But within that arc, there were smaller arcs. So there was basically a hero's journey within a hero's journey, right? And it was all about like tripping up. It was all about like, well, how do I build that feature? Oh shit, like I actually don't know. I have to learn something. And then I overcome that. And so basically you kind of like, it's a stepping stone toward a bigger arc. And but it's all about like having to overcome a challenge, and that's where the learning happens. But and the larger vision of the arc is what provided the motivation so that you want to kind of lean in and keep overcoming the challenges to get to the promised land.
Yes, I love that, the way that you said that, because it's true. It's true. We call them in our practice mini pinnacles. Sometimes we call them minnacles, right? So sometimes, looks like one mountain, but imagine a mountain range, right? That looks like this, and it's still leading up to something, major. There's still a main pinnacle, but there's mini pinnacles on the way to that, especially if you're working on something like a year-long leadership development program or a manager training. You're going to have a pinnacle for each session within that. Let's say it's a year-long program and you meet once a month for 2 days or something. Each one of those 2-day programs has their own pinnacle. Even each session within that 2 days probably has its own mini pinnacle, right? But it's all building up to a major pinnacle towards the end of the program. And one of the other things you'll see in this diagram is that the pinnacle is not exactly halfway. I think of it as generally about 3/4 of the way through. So that major thing you're building up to, you need time to build the trust, rapport, the basic understanding of the concepts that you're working on in order to deliver that pinnacle effectively. So you'll see it's towards the end, but not at the end, right? Because if we do our pinnacle like, woo, big blowout at the very end, and then we don't have time to integrate, people walk away a little bit undone sometimes. Simeon, I see your hand. Would you like to share?
Yeah, I'm curious how you think about the prior comfort level of the audience. I see some, so I comment in the chat, it's kind of a cliche that when you go to a conference, the hallway track is the best. But that's frequently an observation made by people who've been to the conference 3 times and know a lot of people. And if you take a newcomer and you're like, hey, just go hang out and find people to talk to, that can be a super stressful experience. And there's actually a lot of comfort in the flat model where it's like, well, there's 3 talks, pick which one you want to go to. And then if you don't like it, it's okay. In an hour, there'll be another talk. How do you kind of choose between these models and not put people in their stretch zone when they're strangers without any context, say? Do you adjust your model based on the comfort level of the audience with one another?
Yeah, I think, Simeon, that's a great point. And I will say that I tend to be that kind of awkward, introverted person that's hanging out by the cheese plate when I'm in a place where I don't know anyone. Like I have not easily had time making friends with strangers, which I think is part of why I love this work, is because I really believe in structured, facilitated opportunities to connect people. So from your question, like, I don't necessarily think it's a matter of choosing between the models. I still think the dramatic arc model works even if you have an introverted group or a group of people who are nervous around meeting new people. It's then really creating those structured connection, trust building opportunities within that. And so even if you took the standard conference model and you just added at the very beginning some moments of connection, some turn to a partner. After each speaker, you again ask people to turn to a partner and debrief. What was meaningful for you about that? What did you learn from that? If you add, instead of more speakers, more experiential workshops so that we're actually doing the hands-on work, you can modify a model like that and still have it be way more impactful and probably help bring people into their stretch zone, as opposed to if I go to a conference where I'm just listening all the time, not only in my comfort zone, but I'm actually going to be in a negative comfort zone, so to speak, right? Like a negative state where not only am I comfortable, but I'm actually bored, and then I'm actually disengaged. So all of these models are really about creating engagement, creating connection. And I have another piece of the work, if we went deeper into that connection pillar, which is there's actually 4 keys to connection, but the first 3 are really important. The first one is connect early. So really connecting people intentionally and in a structured way in the first 10 minutes of your program, no matter how long your program is. You want to set the tone that connection relationships are priority and important. The second one is to connect often. So sometimes people do one icebreaker, one activity at the beginning of the day, and they're like, check, community, everyone's cool, we're all friends. And it's like, it doesn't work that way, actually, right? Relationships take time, they take repetition. So how do we weave those moments of connection throughout? And again, I like to say, like, when you need to marry content and connection, a debrief is a great way to do that. We get both connection and content in a debrief. And the third is to gradually increase vulnerability. So Simeon, part of what you might be talking about or experience too is like, if we push people to open up too far, too fast with vulnerability, then we get into that panic zone. People are like, nope, And then again, it takes a lot more time to get them to open up. So how do we meet a group where they're at, ask them a question that is in their comfort zone to start with, and then we open up more and more over time. Does that answer your question? Great. I could take one last comment or question. Anyone that has any other thoughts on these models or any reflections that are alive for you in this moment?
I was just thinking that I'm in the process right now of planning sort of an onboarding gathering, and it feels very flatline. Like I saw the flatline and I went, oh gosh, uh-oh. And so this is good. The timing's good. It's helping me kind of rethink how can I make this a little more intentional, a little better. But there was another question that popped up which said, I mean, is there ever an appropriate time to do that more flatline approach?
Yeah, I do think kind of backing up to my beginning of what I shared with Simeon, I do think you can use the flatline model, but space it out a little bit, add those moments of debrief, of connection, of reflection, of calls to action and takeaways, of experiential learning, you know, even trying different models like fish bowls or like doing a interview style instead of a keynote where it's like being talked at, it's like, oh, it's like that fireside chat or a keynote, or then like having questions from the audience, right? So how do you continue to break it up and change the format? Part of the problem with the flatline is that it's the same thing over and over, and that people tune out. So the flatline would be true if you're just having speaker after speaker. The flatline will also be true if you have an 8-hour long scavenger hunt. Right? It doesn't matter if it's low energy or high energy. If it's the same thing over and over, people tune out. So you want to think about how do you have a dynamic mix of modalities and frequencies, getting people outside in small groups, in big groups, in solo reflection, standing, walking, moving, art, music, drawing, creativity, right? Like how do you bring as many different modalities into the picture as possible? And that's going to keep people engaged and on their toes, receptive, like in that stretch. Does that make sense? Awesome. Great questions. All right. Integration. Yes. Integration. Yes. Stacy, it seems that integration is where people clarify how they will maintain it and commit to the transformation of primary shift. Yes. And we're going to talk about that right now. And then I'm going to ask you all after I go through a more detailed version. So this arc that I showed you is a very simplified version. The actual arc has about 12 different elements to it. I'm not even going to go over all 12, but I'm going to go a little bit more in depth with some of the main elements, and you'll see exactly what you're talking about there, Stacy. Yeah, half-life of attention is 20 minutes. I also have seen the worst case scenario is that attention spans are 8 seconds. So I say you got to work with it and not against it, right? It's human nature. It's not your fault, but we have to find ways to keep bringing people back to the screen or back to the speaker or back to the content or back to each other, right? So I'm going to go a little bit more in depth about this. We're going to have a breakout, and I'm going to ask you to reflect on one of these elements that you feel would be most useful for you to focus on as an experience designer or event organizer. So the first piece here, and this was beautiful because this came up earlier about those greeters, right, is arrival and welcoming. How do you set the space and make a powerful first impression? Because the mind is a meaning-making machine. Every event you create is a microcosm. It's a mini universe. If any of you know Priya Parker in The Art of Gathering, she talks about that a lot, and I think that's so true. So as you're coming into the space, like, is there music? Are there snacks? What's the lighting like? What's the temperature? You know, what are the greeters? Are there colors, the branding, whether that's virtually or online, right? So just thinking about those elements are really important. Then you're going to have guidelines with behaviors. These are 3 to 5, and I think that's like your sweet spot in terms of what people can retain. 3 to 5 rules of engagement. So these are things that we're agreeing to. I think of guidelines as mindsets that will help your audience get the most out of the experience. So how can you address fears and concerns, resistances they may have, but also how do you help them put on that rose-colored glasses so that they're optimized to really get the most out of what you've created for them. Icebreakers, you're turning your audience from passive observers into active participants. You're creating connection, trust, and rapport right from the get-go. So again, that icebreaker wants to happen really early. If you want to make your icebreaker even more powerful, try to make it contextually relevant to your event, to the purpose of your gathering, or to the demographic of your audience, right? So ask a question that deepens the meaning of your event rather than is like a sidebar throwaway fluffy thing, right? People are easy to dismiss that, but how do you make it actually drive meaning for your context, your purpose, and your gathering? Okay, so then you have rungs on the ladder, and I think about these rungs of the ladder. This is like the main meat of in your sandwich. This is like most of what your session is built in, and it's a series of exercises, workshops, speakers, any kind of content that builds on each other. And I call them rungs on the ladder because I think about as you're going up this incline here of our mountain, each exercise or activity or a piece of content is a rung on the ladder. And as they're climbing that ladder, you want those rungs to be equidistant. Anytime a rung is really far away and they have to reach really far, that's where you go panic zone, right? People are reaching and it's like too far, that's scary, I'm not doing that, and then they pull back. So if you can make those rungs equidistant, you get people into that rhythm of saying, yes, I'll go there. Yes, I'll go there. Yes, what's next? Give it to me. Yeah, I'm here. And then, wow, all the way there, and they're at their pinnacle and they didn't even realize. So this is a part of how we make the transformation gradual and easeful, is keeping those rungs on the ladder as relatively equidistant as we can. That also means taking really advanced concepts and breaking them down into basic components along the way. Then at the top of your ladder, you have your pinnacle. Your pinnacle we've talked about, it's that experience that delivers the promised transformation of your event. So this is exactly what we just talked about on that way up to we talked about the primary shift. This is where the primary shift is realized. Everything that's come into this point is leading up to that. And on the way down, we have a number of moments of integration. First, we have our pinnacle integration to make sure that that pinnacle is felt and retained. As you said earlier, that's really about committing to the primary shift, whatever that primary shift was for them. There's also a cumulative integration, which is looking at the whole program and what they got out of it. And then in your closing, you're doing an intentional farewell to share and send everyone off on a high note. So that is not logistics. That is not a happy hour. This is like an intentional moment where we seal the container and we thank people. And oftentimes this is like, what's going to be happening next. And you don't want to end with like, oh, and then sign up for this. You want to end on a good high note with people, or, it could be a different note, but an intentional note, let's say that. So these are all the elements that we're going to just look at today. And the design principle here is that structure is your co-facilitator. So if you have a really well-designed, thoughtful, and intentional structure, it means it's easier to deliver that content for you or for anyone else. So if you're scaling programs, if you want to have multiple people be able to deliver the same content, the more thoughtfully and intentionally designed your structure is, the easier it is to hand that off. So as we talked about the dramatic arc, it's a proven structure I've been leading for many years. It creates repeatable, scalable results you can count on for profound impact every time. So it works for a 1-hour workshop, a 2-day conference, a year-long manager training. So it's expandable and collapsible, which is what's fun about it, and you can modify it for your purpose. So thinking about the work that you're doing with your teams, with your groups, of the elements we've just reviewed, which one is in your stretch zone? So not necessarily like, there's probably a lot of those elements that you're like, oh yeah, comfort zone, I got that, I already do that, I feel good about that. But is there one that's in your stretch zone? Maybe you don't do it as often, maybe it makes you a little bit nervous, that would create even more impact in your event design, especially if we're thinking empathetically towards our audience. Is there one that you feel like, wow, if I integrated more icebreakers, if I really made my pinnacle more experiential, that would really serve my audience? I think they would really grow and learn and get more impact out of the events that I'm designing if I focus on the welcome and the opening, like what's that first impression, really setting a strong tone. So I'm making it up. So I'm going to give you just a moment now to think about it. Here again, solo reflection is all the elements, and I'm going to just let you ponder that while I get your breakouts ready. And then we're going to go into one final breakout where you're going to get a chance to connect with hopefully some new friends, people that you didn't talk to before. And you'll have another 5 minutes to do that. All right. Great. Okay, so can you give me a thumbs up if you have one in mind that feels like a good one for you to talk about and share? All right, if you're not 100% sure yet, then maybe let your partner go first and then see what pops up for you, right? So you've got arrival and welcoming, guidelines and behaviors, an icebreaker, rungs on the ladder, pinnacle integration where you debrief pinnacle, calls to action, and a closing. So those are 7 different elements that you might choose from. And all right, I'm going back to the slide here. All right, so we've got groups of 2, 2 minutes each, 5 minutes total. You have 2 minutes to share while your partner's listening. What's the element that is at your stretch zone and why? How would integrating this element support your experience design or your participants' success? The person with the darker shirt is going to begin first. Take the first minute to drop in, say hi, again, introduce yourself. I'll send an announcement when it's time to switch. And again, aim for equal voice and accepting non-closure. We're just going to work with the time we have. All right, so that being said, I'm going to open your rooms now. Have a great conversation. I'll see you back here in 5. Sometimes really long, sometimes really short, depending. So I'd love to hear from you if you're willing to drop it in the chat. Which element did you choose? That would create even more impact for you in the programs you're doing. So if you drop in the chat, which element you think would create most impact for you, most impact for your participants? Always interesting to see because sometimes there's different patterns within different groups of what's most alive. Nice, rungs on the ladder, yes. Integration. Coming up with an icebreaker question that ties to the purpose, yes. Guidelines for engagement, integration, rungs on the ladder. Yes, those rungs. Chanel, still unsure. Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot to choose from. Integration, making sure it sticks and creates the intended impact. Yes. And again, you'll see with a lot of that flatline model is that things are jammed so much back to back to back that you're not giving people the time and space to reflect, to name and claim the changes that they want to make. Right, so this period of integration, debriefing, reflection is so crucial if we want people to have lasting change. Rungs on the ladder, and if they get enough people ready for the pinnacle experience, yes, right? So if you get to your pinnacle and that becomes a panic zone moment, you know you've been a little too ambitious about what you can achieve in that session, and you need to back up, and probably one of your previous rungs on the ladder was the right thing. Okay, great. Thank you all so much. I'm going to cruise into our finish line here. I want to just quickly reverse engineer what we did today and how it followed this model. So on arrival, we had a music going and a prompt in the chat about what kind of events you do. For our guidelines, we talked about consumer, critic, and contributor. For the icebreaker, we put you in breakout groups. You talked about your definitions of experience design. For the rungs on the ladder, we talked about the 3 pillars: connection, transformation, collaborative learning, the 3 models, the flat line, the chaos model, and the dramatic arc. We talked more about the dramatic arc. Our pinnacle was what you just did, our breakouts around the stretch zone. So it requires a little bit of vulnerability and reflection on your part and owning, yes, you're all really experienced and we're all learning and growing together. And how would you maybe take this element and apply it? Pinnacle integration is that little brief chat moment we just had here about the stretch zone, you sharing that. The cumulative integration, which is looking back on the whole session, is what we're doing right now. So I'm, again, pulling back that curtain. And final reflection and closing is coming up right now in a moment. So this is, again, how I use the dramatic arc to design sessions. You know, in an hour, it's tight, but it is possible. So I just wanted to share with you a couple ways we can work together if you'd be interested in learning more about the dramatic arc and this content and how you can apply it to what you do. We offer 2-hour virtually delivered team training workshops. I've listed 3 here: virtual meeting mastery, our intro to designing dynamic experiences, which is more of this content, an intro to facilitation finesse, which is how you can really show up live in the room and be able to handle anything that happens with confidence and ease. And so there's some links here. Again, they'll get access to these, and my assistant Aubrey's dropping some links in the chat. We also have some public-based programs. These are cohort-based trainings. There are 4 sessions each. One is around facilitation finesse, that's on the left, that happens in February. And one is around designing dynamic experiences. So the facilitation is how you bring your content to life in the room. And the other one is how you design experiences and create that curriculum using the dramatic arc. And we've just given you a code to use, TKC10, for 10% off if you want to join us for either one of those. And as we close out today, I know we're just right 1 minute from closing. Love to hear your main takeaway from today. What's the thing that is standing out for you? What is that nugget? If you could put a jewel in your pocket and say, like, that is the one thing that I got from today that will be useful to me, that I want to share with my colleagues, that I'm going to use to innovate the experiences I create for my team, for my staff, for my groups. What's that one thing in a word or a phrase that you might be able to articulate? Because again, if you want to name it and claim it, that really helps to solidify it in your mind. Designing dramatic experiences, the arc, intention and integration. Yes, a full experience from start to finish. Intention. Icebreakers throughout from Chanel. Yes. Creating a dramatic arc, using the arc. This was fantastic. I loved it. Yay. Time to pinnacleize from Asha. I love the way you said that. That's great. Expanding the stretch zone without snapping the rubber band. Yeah, so as you've seen, I love these visual metaphors. I think it just helps us remember things, right? So if you take a few of these simple concepts and you just apply it to what you're doing, it can make a big difference, even one or two of these elements. So the meta moment of showing what we did. Yes, thank you so much. So appreciate you all coming today. And we're going to send you follow-ups. You can stay in touch with me or reach out anytime. Jenny at The Primary Shift, find me on LinkedIn or check out The Primary Shift for more things that we're up to. And I believe you'll get a copy of the slides and the recording. And I will turn it back to you, Marco, for any closing words.
Thank you, Jenny. This was fabulous, very hands-on, quite experiential, and really appreciate it. Something different. It's unlike our typical talks, less flat line and more dramatic. So super appreciate it. Thank you. And just as a closing thoughts, Technocon is for us, by us, so we're always looking for speakers. So if you have something that you would like to share, ping either Mark or me or anyone else. And just wanted to drop a note that we are launching a podcast, so we're going to be doing some interviews and trying that format. And I see Andrew here. We just recorded one, so yay, that's coming up. So I may tap you on the shoulder for that, so you can tell your story in that format as well. But always looking for speakers, and again, it's a community by us for us. Thank you all, and see you soon. And thank you, Jenny.
Thank you all so much. Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me. Have a wonderful rest of your week, everybody.